And I think that what we're going to see in the next cycle is something very similar. IBC launched in the middle of this past cycle. A lot of folks were excited about Osmosis, but the full suite of DeFi tooling that Ethereum had and the full application composability that Ethereum had was non-existent within the broader IBC ecosystem. We're building those building blocks right now, and I think that the kickstart of the next cycle is very likely to be async composability driven, and we're likely to see this sort of like complex applications across many chains knit together with really neat user experiences on the front end to be the driver of the next sort of like crypto adoption wave. So yeah, that's kind of what we're preparing for.
3, 2, 1.
Here we go!
Welcome, Friends Validator community, to yet another episode on this channel. Today, it will be a more technical discussion, and with nobody else than Jack Zampolin from Strangelove Ventures. Hey, and good morning, Jack.
Hey, Yuri, how's it going? Good to see you.
Yeah, likewise. The pleasure is mine. Thanks for taking the time so early in the morning. Today, we will talk a lot about IBC and relayers, because we believe that most people are not even aware that they exist, how they work, how they impact IBC. So, but before we do that, I think it would be like super helpful for people to get into the conversation, to reflect real quick, how does IBC actually work and how IBC precisely differs from traditional bridging solutions. So I think it makes sense to touch base on that real quick. So a lot of bridging solutions today are like very centralized. So either companies in between that is handling transfers between different blockchains, but then there's also the mechanism where you could lock assets on one chain and remint them on a different chain. So how precisely is IBC different from these traditional bridging solutions, and where do the relayers come in?
Yeah, so I think that the biggest difference between IBC and traditional solutions is a lot of traditional bridging solutions rely on a multi-sig. It's a contract on one side, there's a contract on the other side. That contract is owned by a multi-sig. Anytime users want to move funds across the bridge, the multi-sig needs to sign some transaction on the other side. So one sort of like general high-level idea when we're talking about cross-chain communication is you need to have a transaction from one chain, and then you take the results of that transaction from another chain, use them as inputs into a transaction on a second chain. And the big difference between the bridges is like, what is the certifying authority? Like, is it a multi-sig? Is it something else entirely? And this is where IBC is sort of like very, very innovative. IBC doesn't rely on a multi-sig. It relies on a light client from the other chain. So this sort of like means, what is a light client? One way to put it, and this is kind of a technical way to do it, is a light client is a succinct representation of the state of a blockchain. So like, what does that mean? Succinct means small, like on the order of kilobytes. State means like account balances and tokens and all of those fun things that we care about on blockchains. And what can we do with that light client? We can prove things about the state. So you can prove that an account balance is a certain number of tokens. You can prove that somebody sent tokens over IBC. So that's what the light client piece of it is. And that sort of anchors the security of IBC. And light clients are built to have the same trust assumptions as the underlying blockchains. So in Tendermint, you rely on 1/3 of validators can censor transactions, and 2/3 of validators can change state. And the security of the light client of a given Tendermint chain is the security of a light client of a given Tendermint chain is dependent on the validator set itself. So you get the same security assumptions as if you're on the chain. And the small piece of that light client is important because we want to go put that light client into another blockchain as a part of a smart contract, basically. So in IBC, instead of multi-sigs being this sort of certifying authority that says what can travel over the bridge, in IBC, it's light clients. And that adds a lot more security. So one of the things I said earlier is that when you're bridging something, you need a transaction on one chain, and then there needs to be a sort of another transaction on the other chain to say, we're doing this thing from over here. In IBC, the relayer role is performing that second transaction, because you as a user, when you send funds over to Osmosis, you say, hey, I want to send funds over to Osmosis. And if you look at the JSON in Kepler, when you send the transaction, it's called a message transfer. And that message transfer creates an outgoing packet from the Cosmos Hub going to Osmosis. And the relayers, what they're doing is they're sitting there looking at any outgoing packets from the Cosmos Hub, and they grab the outputs from the transaction and they put them into another transaction and send that transaction over to Osmosis. So at its most simple, that's what a relayer does.
So basically, so to break it like a little bit down, so you can basically imagine that a relayer essentially gets or issues a receipt that something happened on chain A, and that now something on destination chain B is about to happen. So it basically confirms, hey, on chain A, everything worked completely appropriately. We can now use the funds that have been like indirectly bridged over to destination chain B, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so I think this is also like pretty important. Like, is like are IBC relayers something that just occur in the Cosmos ecosystem, or do we also have relayers in other ecosystems, like let's say the Polkadot ecosystems, or also in Avalanche where we have subnets? How are they doing the communication between the other chains? Do they also use relayers?
So like the word relayer is a very inexact word. It's a word whose meaning is kind of being defined right now. In IBC, relayer means something very specific. In IBC, relayer means something very specific. It means that it's this untrusted role that anyone can perform, and they're grabbing proofs from one chain and they're packaging them up in a transaction for another chain. The word relayer is sort of generically used in bridging technology to mean whatever sort of server-side process sits there and completes these transactions. So user sends it on one side, and then the relayer sort of completes the other side of it. There are many protocols that have a relayer, and those relayers are, in some protocols, are trusted. They can misbehave. They can do all kinds of things that maybe you don't want them to do. And some protocols use economic incentives to try to ensure good behavior from the relayers. Anyway, that is neither here nor there. But yeah, so that relayer word means a lot of different things. So for example, in Axelar, the Axelar validator set makes up the multi-sig over on Ethereum. So when you send your tokens, like your USDC from ETH to Axelar, there's some relayer process that makes the second handshake, but that is not the same as an IBC relayer. Now, as IBC expands to other ecosystems, like we're working on IBC for Polkadot, we have implemented the Polkadot RPC and the ability to send Polkadot transactions in the Go relayer, so that when we're relaying between Polkadot chains and different Cosmos chains, all of that can happen from the same binary, and that relaying is IBC relaying. So yeah, I guess that's kind of a roundabout way to answer your question.
Yeah, and if you guys are interested in learning more about what chains are coming to the Cosmos next and what is necessary in order to ship IBC, let's say, to Polkadot, then you can also check out the recent interview that I've did with Brainjar and with Susanna Evans, the IBC lead. They shared their thoughts on what it takes to ship IBC to different ecosystems. But yeah, let's focus once again on on relayers in the Cosmos. So again, I think many people do not even know that they exist and what they are doing for great work. As far as I know, you also run relayers by your own, I think, with Strangelove Ventures. So could you talk a little bit about your role here, and also a little bit about how many relayers exist in Cosmos, how many entities are doing that? So it seems like it's a little bit invisible for most of us.
Yeah, so at Strangelove, we don't only run relayers, we build the most used relayer, and it's actually the first IBC relayer that ever existed. The Go relayer, I wrote that back in 2020, late 2019, early 2020, as a way to ship IBC, because a lot of the early IBC work was just happening on chain, and everyone said, "Oh, the relayers, that's easy. All they need to do is send transactions." And after a while, they had been working on the on-chain pieces of it, and I was like, "So, are we going to have some way to actually send these transactions?" And they were like, "Oh, that's easy." And I went and tried to do it, and I was like, "It's not easy. This seems like a big piece of work." So I started working on it, and that was actually how we were able to test and build IBC was with the relayer. So that has bounced around a number of organizations, but now is being maintained and built by Strangelove. We just shipped a number of major updates to make it much more performant, much more capable, have a lot more features, and we're kind of continuing to ship major features there. So we build relayers, not just run them. We do also run relayers. We do those on behalf of different chains like Agoric and Sommelier, and then on behalf of folks like Stride. And yeah, I mean, that's there's a bunch of folks running relayers, and I think that a number of block explorers now have relayer rankings and different things. One of the hard parts about sort of figuring out who's doing the relaying is there's some signatures that you can look for in transactions, i.e. message packet receive and message packet acknowledgement or message update client. Those are three different types of Cosmos transactions that basically only relayers send right now. But I think a lot of the sites that I've seen require relayers to register their wallets. We haven't really registered our wallets anywhere, so we're not really showing up on any of these leaderboards, but that's fine. But yeah, so that's I think Cosmos Station has a great relayer board on it, and I would encourage folks to check that out.
Yeah, I think that would be an incredible resource also to visualize what's going on behind the scenes, so to say. But yeah, a quick estimation. So how many entities are running relayers in Cosmos today? What do you think? We can also look at
I would guess somewhere between 25 and 50, if I had to guess. There's a large community of validators who have decided to start running these things. It's a lot of the folks who validate love running infrastructure and are kind of passionate about it. And relayers are another thing that you can run. And they send high volumes of automated transactions, and they perform this IBC magic, which is really cool. And I think we built a large community of folks who enjoy doing that. And I think that by making the core relayer software itself easy to use, that's been a huge part in encouraging this sort of community of relayers.
Cool. And speaking of that, so we had Mac from Skip on the show recently, and we also talked about IBC relayers, and he described the magic that you just described, that we can use IBC as much as we want, and somehow my atoms arrive on osmosis, and even though I do not really know why. So here's the question, how do IBC relayers stay profitable? So how can they allow to run infrastructure for all of us? Because the validators, they earn the transaction fee. So how do relayers make money to cover their costs? And you definitely have costs.
Yeah, I think that there's a number of different profit models that folks have right now. One is relaying as advertising. Some people provide this service and they say, hey, we're providing this service for the community. You should delegate to our validator. I think Friends does this. Do you guys run relayers?
No, not now.
No, you don't. Okay, cool. Notional does this. Notional also gets paid by different teams to run relayers. I know Golden Ratio Staking and Lavender Nodes and a number of other folks sort of do this model where they say, hey, this is a service we provide to the community. Please help support our work in the community. So that's one way folks do it. The way that we do it is we have paying customers that cover the costs of our servers and the costs of the transactions. Those customers are normally chains that require relaying. When we were designing IBC, there was this question of like, do we need to build in fees for relayers from the beginning? And I think that this is probably the most simultaneously the most controversial design decision that we ever made for IBC, and also the best design decision we ever made for IBC. The estimate was that adding fees would take another year because it's a very complicated topic. It's really hard to figure out. And when you're designing a protocol from scratch, adding another huge piece of complexity like that adds these large delays. So we decided to kick that. And the reason why we decided to kick that to a future version or some sort of application level protocol is that we believed, and this was my decision, I believed, and I still do believe, that validators have a sufficient incentive to relay most packets because validators validate on multiple different chains, and the best way to increase the value of chains is to have more and more transactions on them. If you can open up bridges to a number of other chains, that's a great way to bring economic activity to your chain. So as a validator, you are incentivized to send these transactions. And what we've seen is validators have picked up and run with this role. The other thing is this can be paid for out of band. And the entities that need relaying are chains and projects. Stride is a great example. Stride runs a chain that is a product, liquid staking, and they need to relay a bunch of packets. They have a need to pay for that service. So like the users of that service pay for the service. So when we were designing IBC, we're like, this is going to be sufficient for the initial scaling piece, and then we'll add fees later. And lo and behold, the Interchain Berlin team this year shipped a feature called in protocol fees for IBC. That feature is complete, but it's really not usable right now. It's probably another 6 to 12 months before that's usable. But at that point, users will be able to wrap IBC packets with some additional fees for the relayer that are paid to that relayer upon receipt of the packet. And, that's one way it's going to be done in the future. I don't think all relay traffic is incentivized like that. I think the future of relaying is a fewfold. One, applications like interchain accounts and interchain queries, those folks are likely to run their own relayers or pay directly for them. And those relayers will kind of continue to be run server side. They also have the option of wrapping those in fees and trying to create a market for moving those packets over. Those are models that will exist. For users sending ICS-20 packets or just token transfers over IBC, I anticipate that most of those are going to be handled by the JavaScript in their browser. The users themselves will send that second transaction, and the people who are making the transfers will pay for their transfers to be made. Right now, that's a little hard because of the fee story within Cosmos, where each chain has separate fees. But as we make it easier to automatically change tokens into different denominations and pay fees on multiple chains, we can automate away a lot of that complexity for users, and then users can kind of complete their own transfers. So I think that those are the sort of like two main ways that relaying works moving forward.
Cool. And getting back to the conversation I had with Mac, he also proposed another idea. Just wanted to pick your brain on this. So also as MEV becomes a more relevant topic in the Cosmos, the idea emerged that, for example, relayers could could earn like an MEV revenue cut. So let's say I'm realizing that there's an arbitrage opportunity between Junoswap and Osmosis, and I want to take advantage of this arbitrage opportunity. Then I could go ahead to you guys from Strangelove Ventures and say, hey guys, I really want to take advantage of this arbitrage opportunity first. I give you an MEV revenue cut. So we could do this like all via flash loans. What are your thoughts on this? Sharing MEV revenue cuts with relayers.
I have some nuanced feelings on this. I think in theory, when you lay it out that way, it sounds great. That sounds awesome. I run relayers. I'd love to do that. But when you get down to the specifics of how that works, it's really unclear whether or not that's a straightforward picture. Is that the job for a relayer, or is there a separate piece of software that's looking for cross-chain arbitrage opportunities and is able to perform its own relaying, and that's connected to Skip's API and they're able to sort of prioritize their own transactions? I think it's more like number two. And that's actually more like a cross-chain arbitrage bot that looks at a number of different dexes across the interchain and tries to perform arbitrage as quickly as possible. And that is a related but orthogonal set of concerns from relaying directly.
Okay. Yeah, I think that that makes sense, and very important to stress this, because like on the first side, it indeed makes sense. But yeah, if you go down the rabbit hole, you also see some concerns. Speaking of concerns, so earlier in the conversation, we mentioned that there are between 25 and 50 entities who run relayers, and we discussed it in the beginning how crucial relayers are in order to make IBC transfers possible. So let's talk a little bit about a worst case scenario. Let's say, for example, all relayers go down at the same time for what reason whatsoever, or a single relayer gets attacked and compromised. Where's like the separation or like the security mechanism to protect IBC from this? So let's say your relayer goes down, or I compromise your relayer and I do things with your relayer that the relayer shouldn't do. How is IBC protected from this?
Yeah. So the way that IBC designed is relayers are completely untrusted. There is no need for a relayer. Like, there's no way that relayers can like realistically misbehave. They just can't. So that's because the way that it works is with the light client security, the proofs are generated on the other chain, and then they're checked against the light client on the counterparty chain. The relayer can try to forge proofs or forge light client updates, but those will be checked against the actual light client on chain. And we can use the cryptographic proofs to ensure that there's no sort of non-standard updates or bad behavior. So there's no way a relayer can really do bad things besides stop relaying packets. And that would be sort of like denial of service, i.e. if the relayer stopped relaying packets, then they're going to just sort of like queue up on one side. So like that's really the biggest threat vector. And the easiest way to do that is the way that most protocols do this in the wild right now, is they have 2 or 3 different entities that are performing relaying for them. So if one of them goes down, or one of the relayers runs out of funds, which is like the most common way relayers go down, then you can easily, then you have a fallback and packets still continue to flow. So yeah, does that answer your question about relayer misbehavior?
Yes, actually very well. Because this was like also like a question in terms of risks, and this also like answers like the following follow-up question. So if relayers are also like if relayers could represent also a risk in terms of people who want to, like, let's say, exploit IBC or hack IBC. So the relayers do not really play the role of approving transactions, or so. They are basically just, let's say, a ship between 2 harbors, and the harbor, which is like in the sense the chain, decides if it lets in the shipment of the of the ship, correct? So it's like at the end of the day, the chain decides what's going to happen, and not the relayer. correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's very important, this discussion. And now as we touch base on that, on risks for IBC, so there was on BSC the IWL issue very recently, and people were like pretty scared because like for a moment people like thought, okay, after all the hacks, also all of a sudden IBC didn't feel so secure, and some FUD emerged also on Twitter. So could you maybe like unwrap this BSC drama that we have seen a couple of months ago, and also maybe like prevent some fears that people might have?
Yeah. So, one thing I do want to start off with is like talking about reality. Like, this is experimental software in a lot of ways, and we're testing it in production with a lot of money. The reason why we have a lot of confidence in it is because this software has moved a lot of money for a very long period of time with no major issues. And if you look broadly at the bridging space, most of the other bridges out there have been exploited and hacked. And IBC has moved 10 to 100x the amount of total transaction volume over IBC than all other bridges combined. So we're doing pretty good. But that doesn't mean that IBC is invulnerable. There are potential exploits. They move from this layer of stealing people's multi-sig keys and figuring out how to exploit contract vulnerabilities down to the cryptography level and the light client level. If you can make the light client lie, then yes, you can exploit IBC. And I think this is why we need to build in things like rate limits and other security features into IBC. And there's some efforts to do that. And like we're leading that charge at Strangelove in a lot of ways, and we're very excited about that work. We think it's extremely important. But I do want to just also emphasize that IBC has been extremely secure because we put in a lot of work to formally verify the protocol, to test deeply, to also from an architecture perspective, ensure that this is a secure protocol. So there's a lot of stuff going on here. The BSC hack in particular, when you generate proofs from a chain itself, there's a lot of different ways that you can prove different things. So you can prove things about one thing, and you can prove things about a range of things. The way that these range proofs were generated was insecure, and we don't use them in IBC because we knew that that was a potential source of cryptographic vulnerabilities. So we did not use that code, but it still existed within the libraries. Binance has not worked with our team at all, and they are just using our code without talking to us. And they looked at those range queries and they said, great, we'll use these range queries. There was a vulnerability within the range query that allowed somebody to forge proofs and mint a bunch of BNB over on the Binance Smart Chain. And that is like what an IBC vulnerability might look like. Now, in the wake of that, and I don't know if we've had any like full public disclosure of this, but it will come out. We had some researchers on the Cosmos side, I believe Dev from Osmosis found this issue, that found that there was a related issue within the IBC code. And we were able to patch that and update all 50 chains within 48 hours, which I thought was just unbelievable. So, security is only as good as the sort of folks ensuring that. And the people doing that in Cosmos are not only very active, but extremely capable. And we work closely with all of the different app chains to ensure that IBC is secure and kind of continues to be. And the way that we ensure that is through teams of folks working on it.
Nice. And I really would like to dive deeper here. Also, what you mentioned, what you with Strangelove Ventures work on in terms of light clients. So let's talk a little bit about what such an attack could look like at the end of the day. So let's just visualize this a little bit. Let's say I attack one light client, so an IBC attack. Would it more likely look like that I hack or that I exploit a certain IBC connection between two chains? So for example, between Cosmos and Osmosis, Or is there like such a high risk that I could go ahead and say, okay, I'm attacking this one light client, let's say on Osmosis, and this is how I literally attack the whole IBC protocol in general, and I could also compromise other IBC connections between other chains? Or is it just that a hacker could just attack one single connection between two chains?
It really depends on what the vulnerability might be. If there's an issue with proof generation where you can forge proofs, then maybe that vulnerability exists in certain versions of the IBC software. Only the chains that have those versions would be at risk, and then it would only be one direction in the IBC connection where there's the at-risk chain and there's maybe a not as risk chain. One of the things that really helps IBC is we've got a number of independently deployed versions of this software that are continually updated by those teams, but like that provides an environment where not everything is the same. And in that environment, it's much less likely to have these sort of cascading failures where the entire software is vulnerable. Putting in things like rate limits for token transfers and stuff like that will also help sort of like increase the broader resilience of the IBC ecosystem as well.
Okay. Yeah, this makes a lot of sense. And now let's like speaking of that, I know we touched base on this like earlier. We talked a little bit about what an attack on IBC looked like, and how actually separated relayers are from the role of what light clients are doing. But I want to draw a picture like one last time. So yeah, many people are afraid of these worst case scenarios of an IBC exploit. So pretty straightforward answer here. What would happen if we would see like a certain vulnerability of IBC? So let's say we're talking about an exploit between just between two chains instead of like the whole protocol. So what would happen in this scenario that you have also mentioned earlier, that no code is perfect?
I mean, what's the worst case scenario is like an attacker steals the escrowed funds out. So how do bridges work? When you're moving assets between chains, let's say you're moving atoms to Osmosis. User says, I want to send atoms to Osmosis. The chain locks those atoms up and gives a proof that those atoms are locked. And then you bring that proof over to Osmosis, and the Osmosis checks to see if that proof is valid. If it is, it mints a representation of that atom over on Osmosis. So now you have the same value represented in two places, but in one of those places on the hub, users shouldn't be able to get to it. So potential vulnerabilities in this model are somebody figures out over on the Osmosis side how to fake the proof that the atoms have been escrowed. So you mint a bunch of fake atom representations over here, and then you could move those fake atom representations back over the bridge and pull all the tokens out of the escrow account and leave valueless atoms over on the Osmosis side. So like that's what a vulnerability looks like in a bridge. That's like a worst case.
Yeah.
I think one way IBC really helps mitigate this is token transfers are the first application. However, we're moving into this world and it's going to take a while because we need to migrate all these applications. We need to build better user experiences around these things. We're moving into a world where we've got interchain accounts and interchain queries, and we've got all these middlewares and the ability to do much more complex IBC flows. And in that world, we don't need to escrow these huge balances of tokens. We can leave the tokens on the chain where they're supposed to be and manipulate them and send transactions on that chain remotely from other chains via IBC. And in that world, there aren't these huge honeypots of tokens that are just sitting there in this huge incentive to exploit them. these cross-chain flows are getting resolved fully, like in a swap and forward case. If I've got atoms on the Cosmos hub and I want like stride tokens or something, I would make one transaction on the Cosmos hub that says, I want to send these atoms over to Osmosis. I want to swap them for stride tokens, and I want to send those stride tokens over to the stride blockchain so I can stake them. The user sends one transaction and that entire flow happens and it resolves all at once. And what the user is left with is stride tokens on the stride blockchain and no bridge risk. And in that way, I think we can sort of like help reduce this risk, and it's like interchain accounts and some of these other things of having these huge token balances locked up. And I mentioned rate limits a few times. Those are key things. And like in the event of a exploit, a rate limit would help prevent all of those funds getting pulled out. And they would only be able to pull out a certain amount of funds over a certain time period, and that gives the defenders, i.e. us, the programmers here, the opportunity to respond to those attacks.
Okay, I think this is like very important insights here. So some takeaways. So we have basically another defending line. It's not like somebody could just go ahead and create a lot of mess, and then from one second to another, everything is down, so to say. There is we could win some time. That's the first thing. And the second thing is also that IBC becomes more secure over time. We make it more complex to also prevent having these huge honeypots, as you described them, across the Cosmos. So we make the design more complex and reduce the space of an attack. Correct?
Yeah.
Okay, that's actually pretty cool to hear. And like, which entities are like now working on what you just described to reduce the space or the room for such attacks?
Yeah, so I think that basically the full suite of asynchronous composability tools that we're building for IBC, where from a smart contract on one chain or from a user account on one chain, you can control accounts on many chains. You can perform complex actions across multiple chains. That tooling is being built by, Strangelove is building it, the Interchain for Lend team is building it, the Informal Systems team is building it, and then applications like Stride are the ones bringing to market this sort of like fundamental engineering work. Quasar is another one, but yeah, like that work is spread across many different organizations within the Cosmos.
Yeah, that's very, very, very good to hear. I guess like for most cosmonauts here. So yeah, I think I would call it a wrap here, because there's like so much to unpack here what we have discussed. So first of all, we now know the role of IBC relayers much better, what they do, why they are here, why we need them. And I think we also discussed some maybe some misconceptions, so that relayers could not just go ahead and manipulate the whole state of the Cosmos, because there are certain barriers for them. And at the end of the day, the light clients decide what will happen on chain A and chain B, and not the relayers. And we also talked about what would happen in the case of an IBC exploit. So we drew some scenarios here and there, but we also talked about how IBC, the design, becomes more secure by making the whole interchain a little bit more complex, and that we also have like a defending line, so that there is not the chance that IBC just goes down within a couple of seconds, and an attacker could run away with all the funds.
Yeah, I think that like another thing that helps IBC is like this sort of isolation. Like each chain is its own environment, and that is isolated to a large extent. Now, obviously not perfectly, and there's sort of like leaks across that isolation boundary. But I think that when Terra went down, that's a great example of something horrible happening in IBC. And like IBC stayed up, relayers kept relaying packets even to and from Terra during the worst transaction congestion that any Cosmos chain has ever seen. And the protocol stayed secure. So I think folks are right to think about and worry about these worst case scenarios. And we as the engineering team do a lot of thinking around that. But as an average user, what I would point to is the huge success of IBC as a protocol, the lack of success of almost every other bridging protocol and the number of hacks that have happened there, and the massive amount of volume that's been moved over IBC comparative to other bridging protocols. And with that, that makes me personally as a user feel a lot more secure. And I think the incident response to the IVL issue on Binance and how we were able to look for and find similar issues very quickly and also roll out patches to a number of affected chains quickly should help make people feel a lot better. Also, your point about like IBC just going down like that, even in the event of a worst case scenario catastrophic bug on all IBC chains, IBC wouldn't go down like that. Even a determined attacker that made a like really good plan and executed it in a surprise kind of situation would struggle to carry that attack out across more than 3 or 4 chains concurrently. And it would be very, very hard operationally to sustain that. So those are like, so I guess what I'm saying is like, even in a worst case scenario, it's not going to happen in seconds. It would happen over the course of days. And that gives the sort of security teams and the chain teams themselves plenty of time to do incident response. And I think that what we saw with Terra and what we've seen over and over again in Cosmos is that validators are pretty decent at doing incident response. And if there's a burning fire, they can take the chain down, safety over liveness, and figure out how to patch the issue in time. So this sort of like defense in depth, this sort of compartmentalization that we built into IBC by design, and the design of the individual chains gives us a lot more security than other bridges.
So with the expansion of IBC, the securer IBC also somewhat becomes, right?
Yes.
Because the more chains we have, the harder it gets to attack all of them. So yeah.
As a whole, but as IBC expands, there are also risks too. Each of these new different light client types that we're going to bring in is going to have its own, they're going to have different risk profiles, and they have different levels of production hardening. The Tendermint light client has been production hardened for a very, very long time, and it's secured billions and billions of dollars of assets for years at this point. So like that will continue to grow in strength, but these new ones will take a little bit of time to sort of like get broken in and ensure that they're strong and secure. And a huge part of that is continued auditing, formal verification, like what the informal team does, in working to ensure that the protocol continues to stay secure through continued investment in engineering, and like all of that is happening.
Yeah, this sounds like very cool, and yeah, again, I think that's like an amazing overview here, and yeah, also like very interesting to know what happens behind the scenes. And last question here. So you mentioned like some sorts of standards that IBC chains are using. What are your thoughts on like completely new chains? Like let's say, for example, NIA is also working on enabling IBC. What happens if such a chain joins the interchain? Is there like a certain risk involved because there are no Cosmos SDK chains? They are like enabling something for the very first time. Is there actually like some sort of risk that we have just touched on?
Yeah, all of the risks that we've touched on will exist with these new chains as well. And just FYI, Strangelove Labs is doing that work in conjunction with Composable. and we're actually working with a number of other counterparties to expand IBC. Like, we've made a massive investment in trying to do non-Cosmos chains, because I personally believe that the only way that IBC sort of wins and continues to be relevant for decades into the future is if right now we ensure that it expands to all of the chains that it can expand to, and we create this broader crypto economy that is truly independent of centralized exchanges. And I think that, like, when we talk broadly about crypto game theory, that's important for a number of reasons. It allows capital to flow quickly and easily into new chains. It allows applications to compose with each other. And it provides this like truly censorship resistant crypto economic layer that worldwide people are able to use and permissionlessly add new chains and new functionalities to. And that like high level reason is the biggest reason why I personally have chosen to work in IBC, and I've like made this my thing that I'm most active on. I think it's really critical for the future of crypto in a number of ways. So yeah, we're doing a lot of that work, and yeah, all of these different types of bridge risk that we've talked about in this show, like those will be present with these new integrations. And that's why it's critical to provide the same level of rigor that we've provided with the Tendermint Lite client with those new Lite clients as well. And we're planning on audits with informal verification, audits by other independent auditing firms. We're working with experts in each of those ecosystems to ensure that their software and their code is secure and that it's idiomatic to the particular instances of their blockchain, like be it Polkadot or over in Near. Yeah, so that's how we're going to deal with that.
Yeah, sounds but sounds pretty cool. Also, I like that that there are like more auditing firms coming like from outside of the Cosmos as well and having a look at it. But yeah, seriously, like after this conversation, also I feel like way more comfortable about IBC and the future of it. Yeah, but yeah, I mean there were like so many horrible things happening this year, and yeah,
yes, there are.
Yeah, and now it feels like IBC always like feels like the safe harbor, the safe home, and yeah, now I have even like more trust in it, and yeah, feels really very amazing, and also to see how IBC expands, it's just fantastic to see, and I think like when we are out of this bear market, we will see so many new chains enabling IBC, also so many new Cosmos chains in general. So yeah, the future
even in the bear market, we're going to see many chains enabling IBC, and I think that what we
100%.
saw in the last bear market was in 2017, DeFi was an idea. Uniswap didn't really launch until the end of that cycle, and even then, there was a trivial amount of volume on Uniswap. I remember trading on Uniswap in 2018. I was like, "This is cool," but like, it wasn't until 2020 in DeFi summer when this sort of narrative around composability and usability became the sort of predominant narrative in crypto. And I think that what we're going to see in the next cycle is something very similar. IBC launched in the middle of this past cycle. A lot of folks were excited about Osmosis, but the full suite of DeFi tooling that Ethereum had and the full application composability that Ethereum had was non-existent within the broader IBC ecosystem. We're building those building blocks right now, and I think that the kickstart of the next cycle is very likely to be async composability driven, and we're likely to see this sort of like complex applications across many chains knit together with really neat user experiences on the front end to be the driver of the next sort of like crypto adoption wave. So yeah, that's kind of what we're preparing for.
Yeah, I really loved the comparison here with DeFi Summer 2020, and also what most people forget, IBC is still pretty young, or like that people are using IBC is also not that like when I used IBC for the first time, I think it was like in June or something when Osmosis also launched. So yeah, people forget about how early we are. But with that said, the future is interoperable, I guess. And yeah, Jack, thank you so much for sharing these very valuable insights. And I think if people want to follow you, Yeah, you can find Jack's Twitter
Find me on
handle in the
Twitter.
description below.
I'm at
And
Jack
Strangelove
Zampolin.
Ventures.
Also, yeah, if you wouldn't mind dropping, our website is strange.love. So go ahead and check that out.
100%. Yeah, you can find all of them in the description below. And with that being said, guys, I hope I see you the next time.
Awesome. Thank you, Yuri. And I will be watching next time too.